All right. So, excited to share tonight. I don't know why I think that I can do this message all tonight. I really don't. I think I preached a series on this that was like 4 or 5 weeks long back when we were in the other side of the sanctuary. So I don't know why I think tonight I'm going to be able to get through a lot of this, but I hope so. With worship, it's something that I started when I was about 15 years old. That's kind of how God called me into ministry. I started with my first Christian band when I was about 15. I played in worship bands all the way up here, never pastored, and then got called over here to do this. But every ministry I ever did started with a guitar, and so it's just when I get to play it, it's nice, and it's just a reminder of God's faithfulness in my life. If you have your Bibles, Genesis 37, we're going to be going through 37 to 41 tonight. There's a lot of scripture, so just jump in and hang on. But I want you to see how it's all part of the plan. It's all part of the plan. Everything that looks murky, everything that looks messed up, everything in your life right now that, some things that are not going the way you want to, if we'll just stick with the Lord, it's all part of the plan. Genesis 37, let's start here. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, and his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. He told on them. Now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him, the coat of many colors, as we like to talk about. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." And his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told his brothers, "Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but you know what? His father kept it in mind. Joseph is his father's favorite because he's born to him in his old age. And Joseph has these dreams. We saw it where the sheaves are falling down, and suddenly his sheaf rose up and stood upright, but the others fell to the ground before it. And then he dreamed that the moon, the sun, and 11 stars, what's that? His mother, his father, his 11 brothers, they're bowing down to him. And Joseph shares this dream with his whole family, and his whole family gets mad. Sometimes people don't understand a dream. They don't understand what God's put in your heart. And you know what? Sometimes it isn't time to tell them yet. You have to wait. And his brothers hate him, even his father questions, "Will everyone in the family bow down to you?" But although his father questioned it, it said that his father kept it in mind. It's just like when it talks about Mary, when she was told her she was going to have Jesus, it says she pondered all of these things in her mind. So everyone is frustrated at Joseph. But look at this. Joseph didn't determine the dream. God gave it to him. So they can be mad if they want to. But Joseph didn't determine. He didn't make up the dream. God gave him the dream, and he's just simply telling it. And there were things in motion from the beginning of Joseph's life. And I'm sure Joseph didn't imagine the path to his dream would be so rocky, but he is about to find out. And what we begin to see after the dream is steps of preparation that lead to the preservation of Israel. In Israel, you got to think of patriarchs here. You got Abraham, Father Abraham. We know says he had many sons. So it means he was going to have this generation, this nation that was going to come out of him. So you have Abraham, then you had his son Isaac. And born from Isaac, you see Jacob is born, Jacob and Esau. And from Jacob has 12 sons. We call them what? The 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob was changed, his name was changed to Israel, right? So all of the nations of Israel are going to come out of this. And what we're about to see is we're going to see that the dream that Joseph has is preparation that actually leads to the preservation of Israel. So what happens at the end of Genesis 37 is Joseph is sent to check on his brothers who are grazing their flocks, and his brothers plot to kill him, but instead choose to sell him as a slave. But God's provision for Joseph is he gets sold to Potiphar, the captain of the guard, one of Pharaoh's officials. So when I look at Joseph's life, I see this. Joseph's persecution by his brothers was God's preparation for Joseph's life and for his plans for Israel. And you say, man, I go through some persecution. You may. But you know what? God may be using it to prepare for something better. So Joseph is hated from the beginning by the ones that should have loved him the most. His own brothers cause his demise. It's hatred from within his own family. Some of you say, I can understand that. I've got some people in my family that don't care for me maybe. And you say, it's hatred from within his own family. But God uses their actions to place Joseph inside the palace of Egypt. So we see persecution in the beginning is actually Joseph's preparation. Because had his brothers not sold him into slavery, he wouldn't have had a meal ticket into Egypt. What would a Jewish boy be doing in Egypt? All right, go with me now. Let's go a little bit further here to Potiphar's house. This is inside of Egypt. Joseph has been sold as a slave. Go to chapter 39 of Genesis. We're walking through this thing. Now, Joseph never takes his eyes off of God. We never see Joseph turn away. We never see him say, no, this is not going to work for me. No, I'm going to go on and do my own thing. No, I'm going to sin a little while and I'm going to come back. No, it says the Lord was with Joseph, even in Potiphar's house. He's a servant, so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him, look, Joseph didn't have to say, hey, the Lord's with me. Everybody, just let me be in charge. I've got it. I've got it from here. Y'all just put me in charge. I know I'm the Jewish servant. No, it says that when his master he saw the evidence that the Lord was with Joseph. He saw it in Joseph's actions, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. And Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant, and Potiphar put him in charge of his household. He entrusted everything to his care and everything he owned. And from the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. And the blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Do you know what my prayer is at my work? My prayer is that Aerospace Coatings is blessed because God has put me there. I go in and I thank the Lord, and I pray that I say, Lord, let this place be blessed because you've put me here. Let me be a servant. Let me serve this place. Let me do well. I want to represent you well. I want people to look and say, hey, the Lord is with him. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. And now Joseph was well built and handsome. I can understand that. I've been there. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, hey, come to bed with me. But he refused. He said, with me in charge, he told his master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted in my care. No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, and because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing toward my master? No. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? See, it all comes back to God for Joseph. The reason he is anything, the reason he even has a story, the reason he's even in the position that he's in is because God has his hand on Joseph. And yes, Joseph's path is messy, but God does something great through it. Look, and though she spoke, this is Potiphar's wife, to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. He just keeps running from this temptation. And one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. And she caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak with her in her hands, and he ran out of the house. What did I tell you Sunday? I said, we're going to fight for our family, we're going to fight for our faith, but we're going to flee temptation. This is what Joseph does here. He flees temptation. He runs from it. Why? Because we're not staying around long enough to find out how it works out. So he flees, and he flees in such a hurry that she grabs his coat, and he says, you know what? Bust on out of here, and he streaks on out of there. And when she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And she kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. And then she told him the story that the Hebrew slave you brought, the one you brought us, came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his house, his cloak beside me, and he ran out of the house. And when the master heard this story, told him, he said, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger, and Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now let me share something with you. Joseph hasn't done anything wrong. Joseph is a slave. And then his master's house prospers. Why is a slave? Why is a servant? But he's done anything wrong. And people, we say, oh, I hate that so-and-so is talking about me on Facebook. You hadn't been sold into slavery yet. All right? Do what's right. Keep your eyes on God. Because what God does is he says, okay, well, I'm going to bless this house while you're here. It's kind of like when the Ark of the Covenant was coming through and they placed it in that family's house, and then that family prospered while it was there because God was on it. They were prospering because God's on Joseph. He's prospering. Potiphar's house is prospering. Then he's falsely accused yet again. So it's like from bad to worse. And then the master says, what? I'm going to throw him in prison. And let me tell you, it's not like the prisons we have now. Think of dark. They might not even have been able to stand up. The ceilings were really low. And he's not spending just a day or two in there. He's not getting 30 days and then that. No, he spends years in here, guys, for something he did not do. But you know what? Persecution was preparation, but prison was preparation. Joseph's journey was not without pain. The pain of jealousy led to the pain of betrayal as his brothers lied to his father and sold him off to slavery. This leads to the pain of abandonment. But Joseph could not be in the place to be promoted to the palace had he not been abandoned and betrayed by his brothers, because that is what led him to Egypt. So he's placed as a servant in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is the captain of the guard of Pharaoh. He leads that house so well. It sees such great success. And then he's so attractive and he's so prosperous that Potiphar's wife is literally throwing herself at him and begging him to come to bed with her. And you know, he's probably lonely there. He doesn't have any freedom. And let me just tell you, Potiphar's probably got a beautiful wife too. I doubt that he was dating dogs. I bet you his wife was good looking. And you know what? Joseph's good looking. She's good looking. But he says, you know what? I'm not going to sin against God, not man. And then he shuns her advances. She falsely accuses him of sexual misconduct, and he falsely throws him in prison. That seems unfair. But what it was, I said, prison was preparation. Pain, preparation. Persecution is preparation. But you know what prison also is for Joseph? It's placement. It's placement. It's like in the game of chess, the pieces move to strategic places in the board until they are needed to accomplish the purpose of what? Domination. Those pieces are moved around. I'd like to think that God moves us into position as we follow him. He puts us in the place that we need to be to make the biggest impact for his kingdom if we'll just remain faithful to him. See, Joseph is really, he's on this fast-paced track, but he doesn't realize it because there's years of persecution in the middle of it. But Joseph is moved into place. Now he's unaware of any of this is going on. It's just like Job. We see Job went through all these great things, difficult times, difficult trials. Job has no idea that God is the one who puts it up to it. Job never knew. It's the same for Joseph. Joseph doesn't know that he's being moved from place to place. But that's where his faith shows strong because he continues to trust in the Lord in his season of trial, and he never once questions the Lord, and he is promoted because of his character and his excellence in Potiphar's house. And I want you to see this now. Okay, so this is Genesis 39. Joseph's master took him and put him into prison. than the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness, and he granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all he held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. Why? Because he's an honest, godly man, and he's been put into prison. And because the Lord was with Joseph, even in the prison, even in the darkness, even in the cold, even in the places where he couldn't stand up, even in the places where he had to lay down, because God was with him even then and gave him success in whatever he did. So he has this great favor on his life. He's promoted because of his character and his excellence in prison, and time passes. And like I said, remember, all this time Joseph's not done anything wrong. Yet he's been a slave, he's been a servant, and now he's a prisoner. He has been hated, he's been abandoned, he's been lied about, he's been falsely accused, he's been in prison, and now it seems like he's forgotten. And isn't it interesting that God hadn't forgotten him in any of this? So after time in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker are thrown into prison. Some time passes, and Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker, they come into prison. There's something's happened, and they get thrown in prison. And one night, interesting how God does this. He worked through dreams in the beginning of Joseph's life. He works through dreams again. One night, the cupbearer and the baker have dreams. And the next morning, when Joseph came through, the two men looked dejected, so he asked them what was wrong. Genesis chapter 40. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. And he said to him, in my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said. I love Joseph's confidence here. This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of prison. So he's struggling. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews. And even here, I've done nothing to deserve being put in the dungeon. And so he pleads his case. And you see Joseph's mindset. He says, I haven't done anything wrong, yet I'm falsely accused. I'm falsely imprisoned. I don't know if you're going through something tonight, but maybe you're there. You're saying, what they're saying about me is not true. And I would say this, even when it looks dark, even when it looks hopeless, even when it looks clueless, even when all of your accusers have nothing but your name and bad things to say about you, and you know it's not true, keep your eyes on God. So when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, I think the chief baker here, you're going to see, he should have just been quiet. He said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket that's on my head. And he says, this is what it means. And I'm sure the baker thought it was fixing to be good. He said the 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Hold up, can we go back again? So, now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. And the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Do you think that God didn't know that was going to happen? God didn't let him remember him. It wasn't time. Things need time to develop. Things need time to develop. You can't pull something out too soon when it's not proper yet. You have to have time for development. So Joseph's using the gifts that God gave him. He interprets the dream of the cupbearer and the baker. The cupbearer is restored back to his position, and the baker is executed. But as Joseph had said would happen in the interpretation of the dream, it happened. So Joseph told the cupbearer, he said what? He said, remember me. But he forgot him. So even in the prison, this is what I know. And this is the same way in the things that you're going through in your life right now. Joseph could not force his freedom, and he couldn't set a time for his season. You say, I want this season to be over. Well, it'll be over when the Lord says it's over. You can't force your freedom. It's not like, well, God, I say you've got to move right now. You better do it right now. No, I can't handle this another week. It has to be done in a day. But he couldn't force, Joseph couldn't force his freedom. And the cupbearer didn't remember him as he requested and bring freedom for Joseph. And guess what happens after that? 2 years pass before Joseph is remembered. 2 years. Not 2 days, not 2 weeks, not 2 months. 2 years. That is a long time to be in a prison when you were falsely accused. So 2 years pass. And now we see the kingdom is in trouble. And they need someone to interpret a dream. But now the scene is set for a Jew from prison to come on scene. And now it makes perfect sense that Joseph's presence is brought before Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is in need of something that Joseph has. See, when Joseph had his coat of many colors and he was prosperous and he was favored by his father, it wasn't time for him to be in front of the Pharaoh. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. It's just like when David killed Goliath, he didn't immediately get brought to the kingdom. There were years, like maybe 15 years, and it was time of preparation that made David the man that he needed to be when he took over the palaces. It's the same way for Joseph. Joseph now, he's done what? He's served as a servant. He served as a prisoner. He's interpreted dreams along the way. He used his gifts even when it wasn't glorious. See, that's what you've got to do. You've got to use your gifts even when it's not glorious. Say, well, Pastor, sometimes I think my only gift is a strong back. Well, you know what? There's trash cans that's got to be emptied. There's things that has to be done. That sometimes when you do those things, it opens the door for you to do another, because obedience always opens the door to opportunity. All right, Genesis 41. Genesis 41. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile. When out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. And after them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows, and then Pharaoh woke up. And he fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing in a single stalk. And after them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. And then Pharaoh woke up. It had just been a dream. And in the morning his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings." 2 years later, he goes, "Oh yeah, what about Joseph?" And Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us as servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each of man the interpretation of his dream. And the things turned out exactly as he interpreted them. And I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he quickly brought him from the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man. Did I skip a? Yes, I did skip it. Sorry. So what happens is he says, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. And he tells him, he says, hey, there's going to be 7 years that we're going to prosper, followed by another 7 years of famine where it will be so bad that you'll forget the years of prosperity. He says, that's how bad it's fixing to get. You're going to have 7 great years, but then they're going to have 7 bad years that are so bad that you're going to forget those years that were good. Now, Genesis 41, let's go on down. There's so much scripture here, that's why I'm having to skip through it. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. So he's looking for a man now because Joseph has interpreted this dream of this shortcoming that's happened. Now, he said, let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And they should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined during the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked him, can we find anyone like this man? One whom is the Spirit of God? In whom is the Spirit of God? Look, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. He wouldn't have said that had Joseph not been through all that he's been through. He wouldn't be in a place to be standing before Pharaoh. He wouldn't be in the place to interpret dreams. And then so Pharaoh says, you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. He just said, Joseph, you know what? You're now the man. The only thing I'm greater than you in is name, but everything is under you. So Joseph is promoted to the highest place in the Egyptian palace. And he then uses all the skills that he had acquired to save Egypt from the coming famine. Skills obtained by running Potiphar's house. Skills obtained by leading a prison. And all of this, guess what? Difficulty was preparation. Nobody likes difficulty, but it does something for us. See, Joseph interprets dreams and God unleashes the plan for preservation that brought forth Joseph's pain, and Israel is saved at the hand of Joseph when they would have died out. Because what happens after this is it gets so bad that Joseph's brothers have to go to Egypt to get grain. They get there, they have no clue, but their brother Joseph is running the show. And after some trickery and some messing around with him, he actually reveals himself and he says, hey, he says, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother. And he says, but don't worry, don't be mad. Don't think I'm going to kill you. Because what you meant for evil, God meant for good. You didn't sell me off to slave, but God put me in Egypt. So I'm not mad at you, because God is revealing his plan through this, and he's preserving his people through my pain. But guess what? Joseph isn't in pain anymore. But even the first 7 years of the palace is preparation. God would use those 7 years of preparing to create a plan of provision which would lead to the preservation of the Israelite people. Then God would also reconcile Joseph's family and reestablish them in Egypt. So Joseph's private pain revealed God's public plan and brings about promotion in Joseph's life and preservation for God's people. That's an awesome God who is working in the details of our day. And we say, oh, this day it doesn't seem like anything's happening. And it's like this. It's like he's doing all this stuff and you don't know what's going on. Joseph doesn't know that day that he's in prison. He thinks it's just another day in prison. He has no idea that his name is being mentioned in rooms he does not occupy. The cupbearer all of a sudden goes, Joseph, oh. Even when I can't see it, he's working. Even when I can't feel it, he's working. But this pain hurts. But this pain has purpose. It's something about knowing that your pain has a purpose. Sandpaper smooths away the rough edges, but it's abrasive. Yet the end result is something beautiful. So don't despise the pain. Just keep your eyes on the Creator. Joseph's prison pain led to his public praise. Joseph's prison preparation led to his people's preservation. And God is working behind the curtain in our lives for his great purpose. But we have to be faithful in the off season. When we think we're like, this is a dead season. There's nothing happening. There's nothing happening. Every seed that's planted begins to grow below the surface before it's ever seen. And then it has to grow into maturity above the surface before it ever blossoms into fruit. But then it comes full circle. And in our pain, God's great passion for us is revealed. Joseph had to go through the prison to get to the palace, but the Lord was present in the prison, and Joseph prospered in the prison because of it. And your prison that you're in right now may be God's plan. And you know what? Your season might be just like Joseph's. It may lead to someone else's salvation. Our seasons of pain sometimes aren't just about us. They're about other people. Some of the things I've been through, I get a seat at a table with other people that I wouldn't have a seat at had I not experienced it. For me, I've had brain surgery, so I get a seat at the table with somebody who's going through something like that, and I can say, I know exactly what you're going through. I talked to a guy the other day, and he was talking about open heart surgery. He had had open heart surgery recently. He was talking about how they did a heart cath, and they went through his leg, and I said, hey, I had one where they went to my brain. They went through my leg and went to my brain. So we were able to talk about the similarities of these things because of the things that we experienced, and it gave me a seat at his table for a moment, and a moment of influence. See, in God's time, He can speak your name in rooms you do not occupy. He was doing that when I came here. I had no idea that Wes was going to call me and ask me to come over here and try out to be the pastor. But guess what? My name was being spoken in places I had no clue about. Think about Joseph. That's exactly what happened for him. He's rotting away, forgotten in prison. But on the appointed day, the cupbearer remembers Joseph and mentions him to Pharaoh. And now the climate is set to bring a prisoner to the palace. Sometimes you got to wait till the climate is set. Don't get frustrated with your season that you're in. So once Joseph comes to the palace, the plan of the Lord is revealed. But you know what? Sometimes you can't see the miracle inside of the mess. And Joseph didn't know each step was actually leading him to not just freedom, but it was leading him to authority in Egypt. He wanted freedom. He just wanted out of the prison. But God wanted to put him in charge. And a lot of us, we're praying for things sometimes, and we're praying for something down here when God's plan is something up here. If we would just trust Him in the middle of the season. It's a season of preparation. So Joseph didn't know each step that he was taking. Although he was being faithful to God, it was leading him to authority in Egypt. And Joseph had no idea that those dreams he had as a young teenager meant one day he would stand in command of Israel and stand in command in Egypt and save Israel from becoming extinct due to severe famine. And you know what? There is no way for you to know how God is going to use your pain as preparation for His plan. He's going to do something with it. The pain has a purpose. It has a purpose, and it's revealing something. Even like when we look here, the fire that we went through had a purpose. It unlocked the door for us to be here. It unlocked the door for us to be here tonight together in this great building, in this great facility. And this is unlocking the door for us to get the next place and the next thing. And we don't know what we're having to go through and what we may have to endure, but God is working in the midst of it to bring about not a greater plan for us, but a greater plan through us for His people. Let's stand tonight. We're not going to have an altar call tonight, but I want you to bow your heads, and I just want you to think about the season you're in right now. Maybe there's a lot of unanswered questions. More questions than answers. I find myself in that. I find myself in a season of some frustrations. I find myself in a season of heartache a little bit. But I also find myself in an abundance of the presence of God. Because He's close to those who are brokenhearted and crushed in spirit. So when we get brokenhearted and crushed in spirit, we're not forgotten. We're actually embraced. And who knows what He's going to use our pain for? No one's looking around tonight. But if you're going through a season right now and you don't understand why you're having to go through it and it's painful, would you just lift your hand and let me see that hand? Yeah, I just want to remember and pray for you. Tomorrow and tonight, I just want to pray for you. Yeah. We're all in this together.